The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over Esperanza Station, casting sharp shadows across the wooden platform where dust devils danced between the waiting crowd. The train's whistle echoed through the high desert valley, announcing another arrival to this growing railroad town nestled between red mesas and endless sky. Martha Whitmore clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as the locomotive hissed to a stop. Through the grimy window, she could see the gathered townspeople, ranchers in clean Sunday clothes, merchants with polished boots, ladies in colorful dresses that caught the desert breeze. Her own reflection stared back, a simple black dress, mended at the elbows and a thin veil that had seen better days. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, adjusting the veil that concealed not just her face, but years of hardship etched in every line. As she stepped onto the platform, conversations quieted. Eyes followed her modest figure, taking in the patched fabric of her dress, the scuffed leather of her boots, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her obvious poverty. "Well, would you look at that?" snickered Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's wife, loud enough for others to hear. "Another widow looking for charity, I suppose." Martha's shoulders tensed, but she kept her chin up, scanning the crowd for any sign of recognition. The letter had been clear. Someone would meet her here, someone who had answered her advertisement for honest work as a housekeeper. But as minutes ticked by and the platform began to empty, doubt crept into her heart. "Poor thing," whispered another voice. "Dressed like that, who would want to claim her?" The cruel laughter that followed felt like thorns in Martha's chest, but she remained still, praying that somewhere in this harsh land, kindness still existed. As the crowd thinned, those who remained seemed emboldened by Martha's isolation. The afternoon heat shimmered off the wooden planks, but the coldness in some people's hearts felt far more bitter than any desert wind. "Maybe she's confused," chuckled Tom Brennan, a cattle buyer known for his sharp tongue. "This ain't the charity line, lady. That's over at the church on Sundays." Martha's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them clasped around her bag's handle. She had endured worse than cruel words. The loss of her husband to fever, the foreclosure of their small farm in Kansas, the long journey west with nothing but hope and the last of her savings. "I'm waiting for someone," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the murmur of conversations. "Someone?" Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Now who on earth would be expecting? "Someone like you?" The group exchanged knowing glances, their entertainment growing as Martha's situation became more apparent. Even some of the younger men joined in, their laughter echoing off the adobe buildings that lined the main street. "Maybe she's one of them mail-order brides," suggested a clerk from the general store, "though I can't imagine who'd order goods sight unseen and get—" Well, he didn't finish his sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the desert air. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from the sun, but from the shame these strangers seemed determined to heap upon her. Yet something deep within her refused to break. She had survived too much, come too far to let their cruelty destroy what little hope remained. So she stood there, veiled and silent, while their mockery continued around her like vultures circling wounded prey. In the distance, another train whistle sounded. Help, it seemed, was not coming. But Martha Whitmore had learned long ago that sometimes salvation arrived in ways you never expected. The second train approached Esperanza Station like thunder rolling across the high desert. Unlike the passenger train that had brought Martha, this was a freight locomotive, its cars loaded with cattle bound for eastern markets. Steam hissed and brakes squealed as it came to a stop, drowning out the continued whispers and snickers from the crowd. Martha watched hopefully as a few railroad workers climbed down, followed by two dusty cowboys who'd been riding in the cattle car. Neither paid her any attention as they stretched their legs and headed toward the saloon. "See?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice cut through the noise. "Nobody's coming for you, dear. Perhaps you should start walking to the church. Father Miguel might have some work cleaning floors." The laughter grew louder, more confident now that Martha's situation seemed hopeless. Even some children had gathered, drawn by the adults' cruel entertainment. Then, as the steam cleared and the locomotive's noise faded, another figure emerged from the last cattle car. He moved differently than the others, slower, more deliberate. A tall cowboy in a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes, his clothes dusty from the trail but clean underneath. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. The crowd barely noticed him at first, too focused on their sport with Martha. But something about his presence began to change the atmosphere. He didn't head for the saloon like the others. Instead, he stood perfectly still on the platform, his pale blue eyes scanning the crowd until they found what they were looking for. Martha felt his gaze before she saw him clearly. When their eyes met through her thin veil, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply understanding. He touched the brim of his hat slightly, then began walking toward her with purposeful steps. The mockery faltered as people noticed his approach. Who was this stranger, and why was he heading straight for the poor widow they'd been amusing themselves with? "Well, I'll be," whispered Tom Brennan, his laughter dying in his throat. The cowboy stopped 3 feet from Martha, close enough that she could see the kindness in his weathered face, the respect in his steady gaze. Without a word, he slowly reached up and removed his hat, revealing sandy hair touched with gray at the temples. The platform fell silent except for the wind whistling between the adobe buildings and the distant lowing of cattle. Time seemed suspended in the desert air as the cowboy stood before Martha, his hat respectfully held in his hands. The crowd that had been so vocal moments before now watched in stunned silence, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gentle authority that seemed to command respect without demanding it. "I'm Samuel Hayes. I believe you received my letter." Martha's heart skipped. This was her mysterious correspondent, the rancher who had answered her advertisement seeking honest work. But she had expected someone older, perhaps less present. There was something about Samuel Hayes that filled the space around him with quiet strength. "Mr. Hayes?" she replied, her voice steadier now. "Yes, I was hoping. I apologize for being late," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Cattle broke through a fence, and it took longer than expected to round them up. The watching crowd shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how they'd expected the scene to play out. Mrs. Abernathy's mouth hung slightly open, while Tom Brennan scratched his head in confusion. Samuel stepped closer to Martha, close enough that his voice would carry only to her ears. "Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to see the woman I'll be trusting with my home." Martha's breath caught. She understood what he was asking and why. In a moment, she would either be revealed as someone worthy of respect or these people's cruel assumptions would be confirmed. But something in Samuel's steady gaze told her he had already made his judgment, and it had nothing to do with her appearance. With trembling fingers, she reached up and slowly lifted the black veil from her face. What the crowd saw silenced their last whispers. Martha Whitmore was not a broken woman seeking charity. Despite the hardships written in the fine lines around her eyes, her face held dignity, intelligence, and a beauty that poverty could never diminish. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was neatly arranged. Her brown eyes, though tired, sparkled with inner strength. But it was Samuel's reaction that truly stopped every breath on that platform. His weathered face softened with something that looked remarkably like wonder. A slow smile spread across his features as he nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already known. "Perfect," he said simply. The silence on the platform stretched like the vast New Mexico sky, broken only by the distant sound of cattle and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Samuel Hayes replaced his hat and extended his arm to Martha with the courtesy of a gentleman offering escort to a lady at a grand ball. "Shall we go home, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly in the stillness. Martha looked around at the faces that had mocked her just minutes before. Mrs. Abernathy's expression had shifted from smugness to bewilderment. Tom Brennan stood with his mouth agape, while others in the crowd exchanged confused glances. These people who had been so certain of her worthlessness now saw her being treated with a respect they had never thought to offer. "Yes," Martha replied, placing her hand gently on Samuel's offered arm. "I believe I'd like that very much." As they walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses, the crowd began to part before them. Some had the grace to look ashamed, while others simply stared in amazement at this turn of events they had never anticipated. "My apologies for the reception you received here," Samuel said quietly, as he helped her into the wagon. "Esperanza is a good town with good people, but sometimes good people forget their manners when they're uncertain about something new." Martha settled onto the wagon seat, feeling the worn wood beneath her and the promise of a fresh start ahead. I've learned that people's first reactions often say more about them than about the person they're judging. Samuel nodded as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. Wise words. I suspect you and I will get along just fine. As the wagon rolled away from the station, Martha caught glimpses of the town she might call home. Adobe buildings lined dusty streets, their flat roofs and vigas speaking of Spanish influence blended with American practicality. Children played in small courtyards while women hung laundry in the desert sun. It was harsh country, but there was beauty here for those who knew how to see it. Tell me about your ranch, Mr. Hayes, Martha said as they left the town behind and headed into the open country. It's not much by some standards, Samuel replied, guiding the horses along a well-worn path. But it's honest land and it provides. Got a small house that's been needing a woman's touch for quite some time now. The implications of his words weren't lost on either of them, but there was nothing improper in his manner. Martha sensed this was a man who understood the difference between necessity and opportunity, between companionship and something deeper that might grow with time. The wagon rolled steadily across the high desert landscape, past stands of juniper and piñon pine that dotted the rolling hills. Red mesas rose in the distance like ancient fortresses, their layered rock telling stories of ages past. Martha found herself relaxing for the first time in months, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the vast silence of the open country. There, Samuel said, pointing ahead to where a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley protected by low hills. That's the Broken Wheel Ranch. Martha studied her new home with keen eyes. The main house was modest but well built, constructed of adobe with a tin roof that gleamed in the afternoon sun. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering shade and a place to sit in the evenings. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, corrals, a small bunkhouse, and what looked like a workshop. It's beautiful, she said sincerely, and meant it. After the cramped tenements and charity houses she'd known lately, this felt like a palace. Previous owner called it the Broken Wheel on account of losing a wagon wheel in that wash over there. Samuel explained as they approached. Seemed like a name that fit. Sometimes things break, but they can still serve a purpose if you know how to work with them. A philosophy, Martha realized, that might apply to more than just ranches. As the wagon pulled up to the house, a young man emerged from the barn. He was perhaps 20, with Samuel's same pale eyes but darker hair, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone raised on horseback. That's my nephew Jake, Samuel said. His parents passed a few years back and he's been helping me run the place ever since. Jake approached the wagon with obvious curiosity, removing his hat as Samuel made introductions. Jake, this is Mrs. Martha Whitmore. She'll be keeping house for us and helping make this place feel more like a home. The young man's smile was genuine and welcoming. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Uncle Sam's been talking about finding someone to help out, and I have to say, his cooking leaves something to be desired. Now that's a fine way to greet a lady, Samuel said with mock sternness, but Martha could see the affection between the two men. I'm sure we'll manage just fine, Martha said, accepting Jake's help down from the wagon. I'm looking forward to having a proper kitchen to work in again. As Samuel carried her bag toward the house, Martha took a moment to look around. The ranch felt solid, established, like a place where people could build something lasting. After so much uncertainty, the very permanence of it brought tears to her eyes. Ma'am, Jake asked softly. Everything all right? Everything's perfect, Martha replied, and for the first time in years, she truly meant it. The interior of the ranch house revealed the efforts of two men trying their best to maintain a home without really knowing how. The furniture was sturdy but showed signs of neglect, dust on surfaces that should have gleamed, curtains that had seen better days, and a general air of functionality over comfort. I'm afraid we haven't been the best housekeepers, Samuel admitted, setting Martha's bag down in the main room. But the bones of the place are sound. Martha walked slowly through the rooms, taking inventory with the practiced eye of a woman who had managed homes both grand and humble. The kitchen was spacious, with a good stove and plenty of workspace. The parlor had comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. 2 bedrooms flanked a hallway, and Samuel quickly indicated which would be hers. It has its own entrance through the side door there, he said, respecting her privacy. Jake and I bunk in the main bedroom and the back room respectively. This will do wonderfully, Martha said, running her hand along a dusty table that would shine beautifully with the right care. "I can see the potential in every corner." Over the following days, a routine began to develop. Martha rose early to prepare hearty breakfasts for the men, before they headed out to tend cattle, mend fences, or work on the endless projects that kept a ranch running. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing, bringing order to spaces that had been purely functional for too long. But it was the evenings that revealed the real nature of the arrangement they'd entered into. After supper, the three of them would sit on the porch as the desert cooled and stars emerged in the vast sky. Samuel proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, sharing stories of the land and its history, while Jake entertained them with tales of his adventures tracking strayed cattle. "You ever been married, Mrs. Whitmore?" Jake asked one evening, his young curiosity getting the better of his manners. "Jake," Samuel warned gently. "It's all right," Martha said. "Yes, I was married for 12 years to a good man named Thomas. He caught fever during a bad winter in Kansas and, well, that's how I came to be traveling west looking for a new start." The men were quiet for a moment, understanding the depths of loss those simple words contained. "I'm sorry for your loss," Samuel said finally. "Thomas was lucky to have you for those years, and I was lucky to have him," Martha replied. "But I've learned that life continues, and sometimes the best way to honor the past is to build something meaningful in the present." Samuel nodded, and in the fading light, Martha caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect. Certainly, but something deeper as well. 3 months had passed since Martha's arrival at the Broken Wheel Ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. The house now gleamed with care and attention, filled with the scents of fresh bread and wildflowers gathered from the meadows. But more than the physical changes, there was something different in the very atmosphere of the place: warmth, laughter, and the sense of a real home. The people of Esperanza had gradually come to know Martha Whitmore as well, and those who had mocked her at the train station now tipped their hats respectfully when they encountered her in town. Mrs. Abernathy, in particular, seemed eager to make amends, though Martha accepted her belated friendliness with the same grace she'd shown her earlier cruelty. "You've made quite an impression," Samuel told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mesas red and gold. "Half the town's wives are asking for your recipes, and the other half want to know your secret for getting men to behave themselves." Martha laughed, a sound that had become common around the ranch. "Perhaps it's simply treating people with respect and expecting the same in return." "Perhaps," Samuel agreed, but his tone suggested he thought there was more to it than that. Jake had ridden to town that day and wouldn't return until morning, leaving Samuel and Martha alone on the porch for the first time since her arrival. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the understanding that had grown between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. "Martha," Samuel said finally, using her first name for the first time, "I have something to ask you." She turned to look at him, seeing in his weathered face the same quiet strength that had drawn her to accept his offer months ago. "When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was hiring a housekeeper," he continued, "but what I found was something I hadn't even known I was looking for. You've brought life back to this place and, well, to me as well." Martha's heart quickened, understanding where his words were leading. "I know it might seem sudden to some," Samuel went on, "but out here you learn to recognize something good when you find it. Martha Whitmore, would you consider staying permanently? Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife?" The question hung in the desert air like a promise. Martha looked out at the land that had become her home, thought of the man who had seen her worth when others saw only poverty, and felt a peace she hadn't known since Thomas's passing. "Samuel Hayes," she said, turning to face him fully. "I believe that would suit me just fine." As he leaned forward to kiss her gently, Martha reflected on the strange turns life could take. She had arrived in New Mexico as a desperate widow seeking charity, mocked by strangers who saw only her threadbare clothes and humble circumstances. But sometimes, she had learned, the best things in life came disguised as endings, and the kindest hearts were found in the most unexpected places. The mockery at the train station seemed like something from another lifetime now. Here under the vast New Mexico sky, beside a man who valued her heart over her circumstances, Martha had found not just a new beginning, but a love worth waiting for. Word of Samuel's proposal spread through Esperanza like wildfire across dry grass. By the time Martha accompanied Samuel to town the following Saturday, it seemed every person they encountered had an opinion about their upcoming union. "Well, I never," whispered Mrs. Patterson, the postmaster's wife, loud enough for half the general store to hear. "That poor widow certainly landed on her feet, didn't she?" Martha felt Samuel's arm tense beneath her hand, but she squeezed gently, silently asking him to let it pass. She had learned long ago that people's words revealed more about their own character than about those they criticized. "When are you planning the ceremony?" asked Father Miguel, the elderly priest who had ministered to Esperanza's faithful for over 20 years. His kind eyes held genuine warmth as he approached them outside the church. "Soon, Father," Samuel replied. "We're not getting any younger, and there's no sense in waiting when two people know what they want." "Practical and romantic," the priest chuckled. "A good combination for a lasting marriage. Shall we say 3 weeks from Sunday? That will give the ladies time to prepare, and Mrs. Whitmore time to have a proper dress made." Martha looked down at her simple brown dress, clean and mended, but far from wedding finery. "Father, I don't need anything elaborate. What I have will serve just fine." "Nonsense," came a surprising voice from behind them. Mrs. Abernathy approached, her face flushed with what appeared to be genuine embarrassment. "Mrs. Whitmore, I owe you an apology for my behavior when you first arrived. It was uncharitable and unkind." The admission seemed to cost the banker's wife considerable effort, but she pressed on. "Please allow me to make amends. I have a daughter back east about your size, and she sent me a beautiful dress that's never been worn. The color would suit you perfectly." Samuel started to speak, but Martha raised her hand slightly. She understood that this was Mrs. Abernathy's way of asking for forgiveness, and grace required accepting it. "That's very generous of you," Martha replied. "I would be honored to wear your daughter's dress." Relief flooded Mrs. Abernathy's features. "Wonderful. I'll have it altered to fit perfectly. It's the least I can do." As they walked away from the church, Samuel shook his head in amazement. "You continue to surprise me, Martha Hayes to be. A lesser person would have told that woman exactly what she could do with her dress." "Everyone deserves a chance to do better," Martha replied. "Besides, I have a feeling that dress means more to her than just fabric and thread. Sometimes letting people help is a gift we give them." The weeks leading up to the wedding brought changes that none of them had anticipated. Jake threw himself into ranch work with renewed vigor, seemingly determined to prove that the addition of a new member to their family wouldn't disrupt the smooth operation of the broken wheel. But it was clear to Martha that something was troubling the young man. She noticed him watching her and Samuel with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, not jealousy exactly, but perhaps a fear of being displaced in his uncle's affections. One morning, as she prepared breakfast and Jake sat at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle, Martha decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "You're worried about things changing, aren't you?" she said quietly, not turning from the stove. Jake's hand stilled on the rifle. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Jake, you've been like a son to Samuel these past years. Marriage doesn't erase that bond. It just means our family is growing, not shrinking." The young man was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that reminded Martha he was still more boy than man in many ways. "My folks died when I was 17, he said. "Uncle Sam took me in when nobody else would have me. This place, it's the only real home I've ever known." Martha turned to face him, her heart breaking at the uncertainty in his eyes. "And it always will be, Jake. I'm not here to take anything away from you. I'm here to add to what you already have." "But what if," he began, then stopped, embarrassed. "What if what?" "What if you and Uncle Sam have children of your own? Where does that leave me?" The question hung in the morning air like smoke from the chimney. Martha sat down across from him, choosing her words carefully. "Jake, love isn't like a pie that gets smaller when you cut more pieces. It's like a fire that grows brighter when you add more fuel. Any children Samuel and I might have would be blessed to have you as their big brother." Jake's eyes widened slightly at the word brother, and Martha realized she'd struck exactly the right note. "Besides," she continued with a smile, "who else is going to teach them how to rope cattle and track strays? Samuel's good, but you've got skills even he admires." For the first time in weeks, Jake smiled genuinely. "I suppose I do know a thing or two about ranching." "More than a thing or two," Martha confirmed. "And this ranch needs you, Jake. We both do." Mrs. Abernathy's offering proved to be more generous than anyone had expected. The dress was made of ivory silk with delicate pearl buttons and subtle lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It had clearly been expensive when new, and the care with which it had been preserved spoke of its sentimental value. My daughter Catherine wore this to her engagement party in Philadelphia. Mrs. Abernathy explained as she and two other women helped Martha try it on in the back room of the general store. She said it brought her luck in love and she wanted it to bring luck to someone else. The dress fit Martha as if it had been made for her. The ivory silk bringing out the warmth in her brown eyes and complementing her silver-streaked hair beautifully. "You look like a queen," breathed young Susan Miller, the school teacher who had volunteered to help with the fitting. "Mr. Hayes is going to be speechless." Martha studied her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. For so many months she had dressed for practicality and invisibility. Now, seeing herself as a bride-to-be, she felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. "Are you having second thoughts, dear?" asked Mrs. Thompson, the doctor's wife, noticing Martha's expression. "Not about Samuel," Martha replied quickly. "But I keep wondering if I'm doing right by everyone. Jake, the ranch, even Samuel himself. What if I'm not what he needs in a wife?" Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, her expression serious. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I speak plainly?" Martha nodded. "I've lived in this territory for 15 years and I've seen Samuel Hayes through good times and bad. That man has been going through the motions of living, not truly living, for longer than I care to remember. Since you arrived, he's been different. Lighter somehow, like a man who's remembered how to hope." "She's right," added Susan Miller. "Even the children at school have noticed. Mr. Hayes used to ride past with barely a nod. Now he stops to ask about their lessons and compliments my teaching. That's the influence of a happy man." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude for these women who were offering her acceptance and support, where once there had been mockery. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you. I don't think I truly understood how much I needed friends until I found them." "Well, you have them now," Mrs. Thompson declared, "and tomorrow you'll have a husband who cherishes you. Some women wait their whole lives for that kind of blessing." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, with autumn painting the aspens gold against the red rock landscape. Martha woke before sunrise, not from anxiety but from anticipation. Today she would marry a man who had seen her worth when others saw only poverty, who had offered her not just work but partnership, not just shelter but a true home. She slipped quietly from her room and stepped onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she watched the sun rise over the mesas. The ranch was peaceful at this hour, with only the sounds of horses nickering softly in the corral and the distant lowing of cattle. "Couldn't sleep either?" Samuel's voice came from the other end of the porch, where he sat in his favorite chair with a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. "Samuel, you're supposed to be avoiding the bride on the wedding day," Martha protested, but she was smiling. "I've never been one for superstitions," he replied, patting the chair beside him. "Besides, I've been thinking about something I wanted to tell you before we head to town." Martha settled beside him, accepting the cup of coffee he poured from the pot beside his chair. "What is it?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You know, when I placed that advertisement seeking a housekeeper, I told myself I was being practical. The house needed tending, Jake and I needed proper meals, and it made sense to hire help." He paused, staring out at the gradually lightening sky. "But the truth is, I think I was looking for something more all along. I just didn't have the courage to admit it, even to myself." "And what was that?" Martha asked softly. "Hope," Samuel replied simply. "Hope that there was still room in my life for partnership, for laughter, for the kind of love that makes ordinary days feel extraordinary." Martha reached over and took his weathered hand in hers. "You gave me the same thing, Samuel. When I stepped off that train and faced all those staring faces, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Then you appeared and you looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something worth claiming. I saw a woman of courage and dignity who deserved better than the world had given her," Samuel said. "I still see that woman every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. In a few hours they would stand before Father Miguel and the people of Esperanza, making promises that would bind their lives together. But sitting there on the porch in the quiet morning light, Martha felt they were already married in every way that truly mattered.